Hi, I'm Mark Nykanen, and I'm here with Seb Bonet, who's an Indigenous solidarity activist. And given the events, recent events, that's an incredibly fascinating place to be these days. That's my observation. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're living through a historic and incredibly important political moment for the politics of settler colonialism and Indigenous resurgence right now.
Why do you think it's happened at this time, Seb?
Well, I mean, it's happened at this time because the BC NDP is incapable of respecting the wishes of the 5 hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en. It happened at this time because the BC NDP has passed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into law and is incapable of following the articles in that declaration. The BC NDP, when it came to power, in every single minister's letter, in the very first paragraph, every minister was tasked with adopting and implementing UNDRIP, and we haven't seen that. And I think that's why we're seeing this incredibly politically important moment, because I think even within the settler population, we're wanting to chart a different course, and we're wanting to move towards decolonization and the further support of Indigenous resurgence.
I think the issue about the settler population is fascinating, but before we get there, I just have to say that one of the things that really struck me in the inconsistency that you just noted with UNDRIP and then the position that the NDP has taken on the Coastal Link pipeline, it almost mirrors in a provincial way, in a very bizarre way, what happened after we saw the federal government declare a national climate emergency, and the very next day we had Prime Minister Trudeau saying that they were going to buy the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which parenthetically was announced at $4.5 billion. The most recent estimates have skyrocketed to $12.6 billion. It's odd, and then perhaps it's not. Maybe it's completely consistent.
I mean, I think for Indigenous people, it's very consistent for settler politicians to make grand-sounding comments about decolonization and then implement even more intense colonialism. So in the case of the BC NDP government, it ran on the platform of UNDRIP, it ran on the platform of getting fish farms out of Kwakwaka'wakw waters, it ran on the platform of not passing Site C Dam, it ran on the platform of opposing the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I'm sure Indigenous people were watching that and looking forward to the Horgan government doing exactly the opposite, which is what it has done. And we've seen that since the very creation of Canada, where settler politicians signed treaties with Indigenous people and then violated those treaties. And so what we're seeing really is the continuation of a legacy of colonialism.
So what's interesting is this is not new to the Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
But the settler population, I mean, at the legislature, there were upwards of 1,000 settler there. What's happening in the settler population, do you think, to bring out that kind of strong support?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing that is happening is that Indigenous people themselves continue to resurge their cultures, their teachings, their hereditary governance systems, and this is having ripple effects into the settler order. And speaking for myself as a settler, you know, my first visit to Unistoten was in 2013, and to hear the hereditary chiefs of Unistoten, to hear Frida Hewson, the spokesperson for Unistoten, describe their hereditary system, describe the values of reciprocity, peaceful coexistence, responsibility that are at the heart of their culture, felt so compelling to me as a settler, and feels so compelling as a way forward for our mutual survival. And so I think that as Indigenous people continue to resurge, a growing fraction of settlers are themselves wanting to abandon the colonial legacy and choose decolonization.
It's interesting that that happened for you in 2013. For a lot of people watching, the first indications that they had that something was really up and about and, in their view, amiss was the ferry action that took place a couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to suggest that we take a look at that video now, and then we can talk about it.
That sounds great.
We're not going to go along with the status quo. We're going to continue to make action. We're going to continue to make noise until you respectfully engage with the hereditary chiefs who have been very, very clear they do not want a pipeline on their unceded territories. Now's the time to stand in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en, with the Unistoten, with the Get 'em Done, and with every other First Nation that's standing on their unceded territories saying no to illegal industrial development.
Still no ferries sailing, no cars loaded.
We're here today in support of the Wet'suwet'en people regarding their invasion by the police in their territory. There is a group that's in the water right now with kayaks and canoes. So that's our support group as well.
From the mountains to the sea, Wet'suwet'en will be free. From the mountains to the sea, Wet'suwet'en will be free. From the mountains to the sea, Wet'suwet'en will be free. From the mountains to the sea, Wet'suwet'en will be free. From the mountains to the sea, Wet'suwet'en will be free.
That was a ferry action that many of you will recall from a few weeks ago. And one of the people, and many people who were involved in organizing that is Seb Bonet. What did you think of that video when you saw that and the action itself?
I mean, first, that even though that was a couple weeks ago, it feels like so long ago because so much has happened since. But then I also feel I feel kind of proud. I feel proud that so many settlers right now are stepping into the politics of decolonization and are moving beyond words, and they're moving beyond protest, and they're taking direct action to impede the continuation of colonialism. Of course, there may be a lot of settlers within the population that feel that targeting the BC ferries is maybe not the right place. And I would say to them that if that's how they feel, then they really should maybe get in touch with John Horgan and the BC NDP and ask them why they can't respect the wishes of the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en.
Well, that's interesting because you just alluded, of course, to the fact that there was a lot of blowback on the ferry action, people who were upset with it, and people who have been upset with bridge closures and road closures and so forth. I saw an Indigenous woman interviewed recently, and I thought her response was quite good, because in effect what she said was, look, we know it's an inconvenience, but if it makes people come to terms with what we're facing in terms of a life of inconvenience, then maybe it'll be food for thought. What's your response to people? Because I'm sure people say to you, hey Seb, what's going on? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, and again, I think about my Indigenous friends, and they say we as settlers can either choose a history of continuing genocide, or we can choose to be upset about some disruption. And I personally would like to choose a history that tries to end that genocide. And if it means some people feel disrupted, then I'm sorry about that. But my greater duty and responsibility is to try to end this injustice right now.
There was an action at the legislature about a week ago, and that produced a tremendous outpouring of support. What did you think of that? And I also, before we end, I would like you to talk about another plan that's in the works.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the legislature action, one of the things that felt really moving to me is to see the very powerful and compelling leadership of Indigenous youth. I can't help but think about Canada's colonial legacy and the history of the residential school system, and how Indigenous resurgence is healing that legacy for Indigenous people themselves. And so now we are able to see the strength of Indigenous youth within their culture and within their worldview. And so I felt really moved by that. And of course, an additional element was feeling moved by the number of settler youth who were there in support and taking leadership from those Indigenous folks, and willing to put their bodies on the line to prevent the continuation of colonial violence in the Wet'suwet'en Yintah.
What about plans, any other plans as far as the legislature is concerned?
Right now, in this moment, a few days after the legislature action, the thing that feels like a focus and that we have consulted with Indigenous youth in Wet'suwet'en with is to widen this struggle. Clearly, Horgan was incapable of responding positively in spite of all of the energy at the legislature, and so what we are looking to do is expand this struggle to include all of the ministry buildings that help run the civil service. And we want to invite BCGEU workers into this struggle, a union that has issued supportive statements about Wet'suwet'en, and we want them to move into positive actions by respecting the picket lines that we're going to be creating.
We're going to be summing up here, but before we go, I would love to have your thoughts about where you think this is going to go, because it's an interesting, fascinating, and for many people greatly inspiring coalition that we see developing among solidarity activists, both Indigenous and settler, and the coming together of so many different environmental groups as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm the best prognosticator, but I know within my time as an organizer, this feels like the most powerful and inspiring mobilization that I've ever been a part of. And to me, I think that speaks again to the strength and the wisdom of Indigenous worldviews that have resurged and that have been here for millennia. And I hope that what we see is just a continued expansion of that.
Well, I trust we will.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so